well. And I also hope that you are having a good day so far. So, for today, we'll be doing our grade 3 English lesson on adjectives. So, we'll be doing our grade 3 English lesson on adjectives. And before we start, we are going to, with our lesson, we're going to log into aplusstudents.ca. We're going to log in with our username as well as our password. And we're going to select the subject of language arts grade 3. All right, so once we've selected grade 3, then we're going to select the chapter of adjectives. So we're going to select adjectives. And under the chapter of adjectives, we are going to focus on the lessons of does the adjective tell you what kind or how many. We're going to identify the adjectives that describe the noun, and we're going to identify adjectives, right? All right. So before we start with, or let's start officially. So we said our chapter is adjectives, grade 3, and the lessons that we are focusing on is does the adjective tell you what kind or how many? Identify the adjective that describes the noun and identify adjectives. That is going to be our focus lessons for today. So, an adjective, right? So, what's an adjective? An adjective is a word that describes or defines a noun or a noun phrase, right? So, it describes the noun. Some researchers will say that it modifies a noun, right? So, it will describe a noun either by saying what kind it is or how many, right? And it is basically semantic role to change information given by the noun, right? So instead of us just saying that it is, I'm going to wear my dress, we can say that I'm going to wear my red dress, right? So which means that you are describing the type of dress that you're going to be wearing, right? Um, Instead of just saying I'm going to be wearing my dress. So you can either describe it in color, you can describe it in like let's say even length, right? My long dress, short dress, my flowery dress, you can literally describe it in many ways. But an adjective, it basically tells us about the noun or describes the noun, or let's say tells us more about the noun. And when it comes to adjectives, right? Adjectives will either tell you what kind, or they will tell you how many, right? So they'll either tell you what kind or how many. And if we look at this picture, this green picture right in front of us, here are a few examples of adjectives, right? There's a few examples of adjectives. For example, fantastic. So here we can even use words like if you maybe want to describe your day, you can say, you can maybe say a good day, fantastic day, or something, right? If we want to say red, right, then we can say, I have a red ball, right? And now you are basically describing the ball. Like, what kind of ball do you have? I have a red ball. Um, Then we have another one where you can either say light blue, where you can either describe where you can even where you can even describe maybe the dress that you have on or the shirt that you have on, where you can maybe say, I love my light blue, or let's say my favorite t-shirt is light blue. Or did you say I love wearing my light blue shirt, right? So now it's not just the fact that you love wearing your shirt, but you love wearing your light blue shirt, right? So you were actually describing the noun, right? You're describing the noun. You are either telling us either what kind, or you can either tell us how many. And then here are also but just a few of the other examples of adjectives, right? That either tells us what kind, or it can tell us how many. All right, so now we're going back to the tutorial. So all of our for today's lesson, right? We are going to do our activities on A plus students.ca. So if you do decide to go back and you want to go over certain activities and things again, and then you may go to A plus students.ca. So then you may go to A plus students.ca, and that is where you will get all the activities as well as the lesson that we are teaching today. All right, so now we're going back to A plus students.ca. To our tutorial page. So we're going into the first lesson, which is, does the adjective tell you what kind or how many, right? So we're going into the first one. All right. So an adjective, right? We said that an adjective is a word that tells you about a noun, right? So it describes the noun, it tells you about the noun, it modifies the noun, right? So it basically just tells us more about the noun, right? Mainly describing the noun. And some adjectives, they answer questions like what kind? And adjectives that answers questions like what kind, we like a few examples. Like if we look at this two examples, is the small baby smiled. So instead of just saying the baby smiled, right, we can either describe the baby as small, we can even describe the baby as chubby. We can describe the baby as cute, right? We can even say the bubbly, cooey baby, right? So you are describing the baby, right? And answers questions like, what kind? So now you'll be like, what kind of baby? And then you're like, oh, no, that small baby, or the cooey baby, or that baby that is the cute baby over there, right? So the small or cute or whatever baby smiles, right? So you are actually answering the question, what kind? It's like, what kind of baby? She carried heavy books, right? So instead of just saying she carried books. So yeah, you can even describe the baby. If you go back to baby, you can describe the baby in so many ways. You can even say the nice baby, the big baby, right? And that is how you can describe the baby. She carried heavy books, right? Heavy books. Sometimes you can describe it in what kind, or, okay, for now, let's just stick to what kind, right? So she carried heavy books. Um, you can even say she carried big books, or she carried small books, right? So if you can think of any other ways to describe what kind of books, right? She carried comedy books, right? So you are basically describing what kind of books she carried. So we can say heavy books, comedy books, um, thriller books, horror books. She carried the Harry Potter books. So you can basically, there is many ways to describe or to modify basically what kind of books or what kind of, however you are describing the noun. So can you think of, if we look at the sentence, which is she carried heavy books, right? So she carried books. Can you maybe think of any other adjectives that can describe what kind of books? Like this one says heavy books. Can you think of more adjectives that describes or that tells us what kind of books? The first one was done for us, heavy books. Like I said, we can say comedy books. Um, so we can also say comedy books. She carried big books. Can even say she carried small books or literature books, right? But it basically has to tell us what kind, right? So with adjectives, some adjectives, they can basically answer the questions of what kind, and it will give you the idea, or it will describe what kind of books that this person is either carrying. Then some adjectives answer questions like how many, right? How many? So if we, even if we describe babies, right? So babies we can either describe as what kind of baby, or you can maybe say how many babies. When it comes to how many babies, you can either say one, you can either count it like in number, like one, two babies, three babies, four babies, and so on, right? Or you can maybe say a few babies or some babies, sorry, a lot of babies. So that is basically how you can describe it in how many. How many will kind of give us an amount, right? It doesn't specifically have to be 1 to 10, right? It can also be things like some. Because if we look at the second sentence or the example that says she carried some books, right? It doesn't tell us how many books she carried. It just says it's some. Can even say she carried a lot of books, right? She carried tons of books, right? So that is how you can basically answer questions when it comes to how many, right? So an adjective, it tells you more about the noun. And adjectives, they either ask the question, they answer the question what kind, or they can answer the question how many. So if you have, or if we find a sentence, right, and then we need to identify the noun, then you can either ask yourself, like, what kind? So you identify the noun, right? You identify the noun, but then you need to ask yourself, like, what kind it is, or how many are they describing of that specific noun. All right. If we look at the first sentence, right, it says that we need to look at the adjective. Does it tell us what kind, or does it tell us how many? The wheels has many spokes. So many, the word in bold, many. Does many tell us what kind, or does it tell us how many? Many. So many. Does it tell us what kind, or does it tell us how many? All right, so if we look at the sentence, right, it says that the wheels have many spokes, right? And many, it tells us how many. It tells us how many. So how many is correct, right? So it tells us how many. And what gives us the idea that it's how many? It is, for example, saying many, because it can say many. It doesn't specifically have to say the wheels have four spokes or six spokes or eight spokes, right? How many will also tell us that it actually has quite a few spokes, right? So in this case, many, it tells us how many spokes the wheels have. I would like brown rice. Brown rice. So the word brown, does brown tell us what kind of rice they want or how many rice they want? I would like brown rice. So does it tell us what kind or how many? So if we read the sentence, I would like brown rice. So instead of just saying I would like rice, this person is saying I would like brown rice, which means that they are saying what kind of rice they want. So what kind of rice they want. Hannah loves green peas, right? Green. And green also tells us what kind of peas they want. Green peas. Hannah loves green peas. So it tells us what kind of peas Hannah likes. So once again, adjectives, right? It tells us more about the noun. And it either answers questions like what kind or it answers questions like how many, right? All right, so now we're going to our test. And does an adjective tell us how many or what kind? So we need to look at the adjective in bold. So we need to look at the adjective in bold, right? Does it tell you what kind or how many? Follow these 5 rules. 5. So 5, does it tell us what kind of rules we need to follow or how many rules we need to follow? So 5 rules. So does it tell us what kind of rules we can follow or how many rules we can follow? 5. All right, so if we look at the word 5, or let's say the adjective 5, right? And then basically 5 tells us how many. And how many is correct because it tells us how many rules we need to follow. So well done. So yes, how many is correct. One sock is missing. One. So the word one, does it tell us what kind of sock is missing? Or does it tell us how many socks is missing? What kind of sock is missing? Or how many socks is missing? So one sock is missing. So if we look at the word one sock is missing, right? And then one, yes, it tells us how many, right? So out of my 2 socks that I have, one of the socks is missing. So it tells us how many of the socks is missing. So well done. Colton spent $15. 15, right? Does it tell us what kind of dollars he spent or how many dollars he spent? Colton spent $15. 15. Does it tell us what kind or does 15 tell us how many? All right, so 15. If we look at 15, right, it is in number. So 15 will tell us how many dollars he spent. So well done. The park has 3 slides. The park has 3 slides. So 3, right? Does it tell us what kind of slides the park have? Or does 3 tell us how many slides the park has? So does it tell us what kind of slides the park have or how many slides the park have? The park has 3 slides. And 3, yes, it tells us how many slides the park have. So well done. Good job. So how many is correct? Sit in the comfortable chair. So the word comfortable, the word comfortable. So does it tell us what kind of chair or does it tell us how many chairs? Sit in the comfortable chair. So does comfortable tell us what kind of chair you need to sit in? Or does it tell us how many chairs you need to sit in? And if we choose the adjective that either tells us what kind or how many, then we're going to say comfortable tells us what kind of chair. And what kind is correct. So well done. Well done. All right. So that is it when it comes to adjectives telling us either what kind or how many. Now we are going to identify the adjectives that describes the noun. So we need to identify adjectives, right, that describes the noun. So either that they tell us how many or they will tell us how much, what kind, right? So if we look at this sentence, I will buy 6 tickets, right? I will buy 6 tickets. If we look at the sentence, what is the adjective over there that tells us how many? We need to select the adjective that tells us how many. What is the word that tells us how many within that sentence? I will buy 6 tickets. So we now need to identify the adjective that describes the noun. I will buy 6 tickets. And if we select the adjective that tells us how many, and then we're going to select 6, right? 6. And 6 tells us how many. So the adjective 6, it tells us how many. Because we could have said, I will buy 5 tickets, 4 tickets, right? But specifically, it says here, I will buy 6 tickets. And the word 6, it tells us how many tickets this person will buy. Cassie will wear a fancy hat in the parade. Cassie will wear a fancy hat in the parade. We need to select the adjective that tells us what kind. That tells us what kind. So if we look at our sentence, what is the adjective that tells us what kind? Cassie will wear a fancy hat in the parade. If we look at the sentence, right, we need to select the adjective that tells us what kind. So if we look at the sentence, we need to select the adjective that describes what kind. Cassie will wear a fancy hat in the parade. It's like asking yourself, what kind of hat will Cassie wear in the parade? We need to select the adjectives. And if we select the adjective that tells us what kind, and then we will choose fancy, right? So she will wear a fancy hat. So fancy is our adjective that tells us what kind of hat she will wear. We could have said that she was going to wear a big hat, small hat, right? But we specifically saying she's going to wear a fancy hat in the parade. The six friends will walk to the store. The six friends will walk to the store. We need to select the adjective that tells you how many. We need to select the adjective that tells us how many. The six friends will walk to the store. We need to select the adjective that tells us how many. And if we look at that sentence, the six friends will walk to the store. What is the adjective that tells us how many within that sentence? The six friends will walk to the store. So if we select the adjective that tells us how many within that sentence, and then we will select the six friends. So how many friends will walk to the store? Six friends will walk to the store. So six is an adjective and it tells us how many friends will walk to the store. So how many? Six tells us how many. All right. So that is us identifying the adjective that describes the noun, right? And we were saying that adjectives that describes the noun, it also answers questions like what kind, or it answers questions like how many, right? It describes what kind or how many. All right, so now let's go to our test. Let's begin our test. All right. We need to select the adjective that tells you what kind. So we need to select the adjective that tells you what kind. If we look at the sentence, look at the beautiful butterfly. Look at the beautiful butterfly. Within the sentence, we need to select the adjective that tells us what kind. Is it at or beautiful? Because now we're describing the noun. And if we select the adjective that describes or tells us about the noun, then we will say beautiful. And beautiful is correct. And beautiful, it describes or tells us about the butterfly. It tells us what kind of butterfly. A beautiful butterfly, a purple butterfly, right? So beautiful, it tells us what kind of butterflies. Well done. Mitchell has a red belt. We need to select the adjective that tells us what kind. Is it A or is it red? That tells us what kind. We need to select the adjective. Is it red or A? That tells us what kind. And what you can also do is to identify the noun so that you can know what is being described. So Mitchell has a red belt, red belt. So we need to say what kind of belt Mitchell have. Is it A belt or red belt? So what kind of belt does Mitchell have? And if we were to describe the belt that Mitchell have, then we will say Mitchell or has a red belt. So instead of saying he's got a blue belt, he's got a nice belt, we just say that he's got a red belt. So red is the adjective that tells us what kind. Emma sang a pretty song. Emma sang a pretty song. We need to select the adjective that tells you what kind of song Emma sang. Is it sang or is it pretty? That tells us what kind. Sang or pretty. So we need to select the adjective that tells you what kind. And if we look at the sentence, Emma sang a pretty song, right? And then we will select the adjective as pretty, right? And pretty tells us what kind of song she sang or Emma sang. That was a wonderful play. That was a wonderful play. We need to select the adjective that tells us what kind it was. Is it wonderful or play? Wonderful or play? We need to select the adjective that tells us what kind. Wonderful or play. That will tell us what kind of play. All right, so if we select the adjective that tells us what kind, then we will say that the play was wonderful. So that was a wonderful play. So we select the adjective, which is wonderful. Dalton did a silly dance. Dalton did a silly dance. We need to select the adjective that tells you what kind. Is it silly or is it dance? Silly or dance? We need to select the adjective that tells you what kind. And the adjective that tells us what kind, we can say it is a silly dance that Dalton did. All right, so now we are going to go on to the last lesson where we are going to identify adjectives, right? We're going to identify adjectives. And also, when it comes to adjectives, right, and selecting adjectives, we do not select any articles. An article is not an adjective, right? Which means that articles such as a, an, or the is not an adjective. So even if you say a big tree, right, do not select a because a, an, or the is not an adjective. It is not an adjective, right? So we do not select any articles, only adjectives that describes the noun. The tree has many blossoms. We need to select the adjective within that sentence. The tree has many blossoms. What is the word that is the adjective that describes or tells us about the noun? The tree has many blossoms. And does it tell us what kind or does it tell us how many? All right, so if we select the adjective within that sentence, right? And then we're going to select many, right? And many is the adjective that tells us how many blossoms, right? It has many blossoms, right? So it tells us how many blossoms. Don't use the dirty apron. Don't use the dirty apron. We need to select from that sentence the adjective. And remember, we said an article is not an adjective. We do not select a, an, or the. Don't use the dirty apron. So if we select the adjective within that sentence, right, that describes the apron, it will tell us what kind of apron. We will say the dirty apron. And dirty, it tells us what kind of apron we shouldn't use. So the dirty one, don't use that one. The town has 3 banks. The town has 3 banks. We need to select the adjective. We need to ask ourselves, does it tell us how many or does it tell us what kind if we select the adjective? The town has 3 banks. All right, so if we select the adjective within that sentence, right, and then we're going to say 3 is our adjective. And this tells us how many banks this town have. So this bank has 3 towns. How many? 3. Sorry, banks. This town is 3 banks, right? So there's 3 banks in this town. So 3 is our adjective that tells us how many banks this town has. All right, so now we're going on to our test, right? Remember, we said that we do not select any articles when we select our adjective, right? We do not select any articles such as a, an, or the. That is not an adjective. It is not telling us about the noun. The town has 3 banks. We need to select the adjective. Is it town or is it 3? Town or 3. That tells us how many banks there are in that town. The town has 3 banks. So if we select the adjective, right, then we will select 3, right? And 3 will tell us how many banks there are in that town. So if you say 3, then well done. Well done. 3 is correct. Several beavers built the dam. We need to select the adjective. Is it built or several? Does it tell us what kind or how many? Several beavers built the dam. Does it tell us what kind or how many? And what is the adjective within that sentence? Is it built? Is it several? All right, so if we look at the sentence, right, and select the adjective, and then we will say several, right? And several will tell us how many beavers, right? Remember, we said that when it comes to adjectives telling us how many, it doesn't specifically have to be in number. It doesn't have to be one, two, three, four, five, up until whatever amount, right? Several is also an adjective that tells us how many, right? They could have said some beavers, a few beavers, a lot of beavers, right? Many beavers. That is the words or the adjectives that they could have used, right? But they used several beavers built the dam. So several is the adjective that tells us how many beavers built the dam. So several is correct. Well done. We saw some buffaloes. We saw some buffaloes. We need to select the adjective within that sentence. Is it saw or is it some? Saw or some? And does it tell us what kind or does it tell us how many? Remember, to make it a bit easier, right? It is better to ask ourselves, like, how many, or does it ask, like, what kind? Because then you'll be able to know what your adjective is. So you first identify your noun. Then from there, you tell yourself, like, or you ask yourself, like, is it like what kind of noun? Or does it tell us how many of that noun? So we saw some buffaloes. So if we look or select the adjective, and then we can say some, right? And once again, remember I said that when it comes to adjectives telling us how many, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be one buffalo, two buffaloes, three buffaloes. It does not have to be specifically in a specific number. It can be some, many, several, a lot, right? That can basically describe how many buffaloes, beavers, or so on is being described or is basically doing whatever, right? So we saw some buffaloes. So some is our adjective that tells us how many buffaloes we saw. I like black beans. I like black beans. We need to select the adjective. Is it like or black? Like or black? Does it tell us what kind or does it tell us how many? So like or black. And remember, we say that we do not select the articles such as a, an, or the. We don't select that. I like black beans. And if we select the adjectives, right, and then we can say black, right? And black will tell us what kind of beans you like. I like black beans. And it tells us what kind, the black beans. The last one is they opened 5 windows. Is it they as the adjective or 5 as the adjective? Does it tell us what kind of windows or how many windows? All right, so in this case, we will say 5 windows, and 5 will tell us how many windows they opened. And that is correct. All right, so that is our chapter on adjectives, right? And we see that adjectives, it tells us about the noun. And some of the adjectives, they answer questions either like what kind or they answer questions how many, right? So whenever you need to select or identify adjectives, first try and select what the noun is, right? Once you've gotten your noun, now you ask yourself questions like, is it telling me what kind of noun? Or is it asking me like how many of the nouns are being described? All right, so grade threes, this is now the end of our lesson on adjectives, right? And we said adjectives, they tell us or describes the noun, and they tell us what kind or how many. Thank you very much for joining the class. Thank you for being interactive. You should have a good day further. Goodbye.